Hello everybody, I'm Mike Schlueter and welcome. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about obtaining the proper exposure when you're shooting your photographs. I'm going to share with you what's worked for me for years, and I encourage you to try some of these techniques, see if they fit into your shooting style and your workflow. If not, tweak them or disregard as necessary. It's really all about finding a comfort zone in your shooting style. When I use the term proper exposure, I like to view that in what I call real world, meaning is it giving me the kind of images that fulfill my vision, as opposed to what a book or a chart or what I call the lab has put out saying it needs to be XXX for this and XXY for that. So I'm a big believer in if it looks good, it is good. Many times exposure and white balance as well are issues that sometimes I think bog photographers' creativity down because they're trying to achieve the accurate exposure or the accurate color balance. And in fact, photographs are really about emotion. They're about feelings, how it makes us feel, how it makes the viewer feel. And color and exposure values greatly influence the emotional impact any photograph has on the viewer, as well as just your personal taste, whether you like your images warmer or cooler in terms of color, or if you like them lighter or darker in terms of tones. So when I shoot my photos and I'm trying to, what I term, get a proper exposure, it obviously has to have values that are printable. I mean, you can't blow your highlights out or block your shadows up and get a decent print, or even use an electronic media. But at the same time, I'm not concerned about getting it specified just to what the book or the lab says. I want it to convey what I want to emotionally. So, with that said, I am a manual shooter in terms of my exposure mode, and I go way back into the film days. So for me, that's all there was. And to some degree, I think it's been a blessing, because for all the advantages with cameras and technology, automatic exposure modes can so easily be fooled. And they take away, I think, a lot of the thinking part and the decision making on the photographer end. So by shooting manual, you're in control of the exposure and how you want your background to be blurred or sharp, or your motion to be frozen or blurred. You have total control over that, as well as just the light and dark tones, which once again can really dictate the mood of a photograph. So with that said, in a nutshell, what I do is I start out shooting in manual mode on my camera. Forget P, forget A, and forget S. Most of those things take all your creativity away from you, in my view. I always start at a low ISO. Here's our pup Barney, come in to say hello. He's been in the pond, so stay clear, Barney. I would recommend start with a low ISO. I start at 100 or 200 and work up as light conditions deem necessary. You're going to get your best image quality at a low ISO, so that's the best place to start. For me, most often than not, the part of the exposure equation, meaning your f-stop, your aperture, same thing, just different names, and your shutter speed, those two combinations, it's really about the f-stop is the first decision-making process for me, because that's controlling your depth of field. If you select, say, f4, f2.8, that's going to give you a shallow depth of field. Your background typically is blurred from your subject. That may be advantageous, or it might not be desirable, but you know that's what you're going to get with that setting. Likewise, on the contrary, f16, f22, you're going to get great depth of field, great depth of sharpness throughout. In maybe a landscape where you have a foreground element and a mountain range in the background, that's what you typically want. That's very desirable. If you're shooting, say, a portrait and you've got a nice background, but you want the emphasis to be on the subject, yeah, a wide f-stop, once again, f2.8, f4 would be desirable to kind of keep the background non-competing with your subject. At that point, then, I take, and I've determined my f-stop, I pick a shutter speed at random, make an exposure, look at the back of my camera's LCD, and judge my tones. Am I too light, am I too dark, or am I right on the mark? And then I adjust my shutter speed as necessary, up or down, meaning if I was at 1/60th of a second and the image was too bright, I would bump it to maybe 1/125th, which is a full stop move, to make it a little darker. And then I would review it, once again, and I would tweak it as necessary until I had an image in the back of the camera that looked good. If the image was too dark, then I would lower my shutter speed, say from 1/60th to 1/30th of a second, or 1/15th of a second, to let more light in and let the image be brighter. Once I determine and have that image the way I want it in terms of tones, I'm done. Then, I'm making pictures, I should say, real pictures at that point. That, for me, works very well. Now, there are some exceptions. If you're in an environment, if you're, say, a sports photographer, or some type of photography where you're dealing with fast action and rapidly changing dramatic light changes, some of those program modes like aperture priority are advantageous. But most of my work is fairly controlled, fairly static, and so it's not a big concern of mine to miss the shot because of not having the proper exposure dialed in. That's typically how I go about it. Now, I do also bracket some of my shots. So, for instance, once I determine that what I call optimum looking exposure, I will then also bracket, say, a full stop or more on each side of that exposure. So, if I have 1/60th at f5.6 is my good exposure, looks great, love it. I will also shoot one at 1/30th at f5.6, which is one stop overexposed, and also at 1/1/125th of a second, which is one stop underexposed. That gives me a little bit of a bracketing there that if your exposures happen to be off a little bit, it gives you a little cushion, a little safety net, if you will. Also, I do recommend shooting in RAW format files as well as large fine JPEGs, capturing them simultaneously as most higher-end digital cameras do nowadays. That way you have complete flexibility and all the options available after the fact when you get into post-production. Once again, that's typically how I go ahead and shoot my exposures, knowing that I can control those backgrounds and the other environments. If I get into a situation where, because of the light levels, my shutter speed, for example, has dropped so low that I'm getting blurs, that's the time then you have the third part of the equation, your ISO. Remember, you started down low at, say, 100 or 200, and as light levels drop and you need that extra shutter speed to freeze whatever action may be occurring in front of you. Might be the flower blowing in a breeze, or your granddaughter riding her bike down the driveway. Then you can bump that ISO up to 400 incrementally, and 600 or 800 until that will make your camera more light sensitive, and you're able to keep that shutter speed where it was to freeze the action and still have a properly exposed image. Here's the key to all of this. Most people are fearful of manual, but if you put it in manual and you try adjusting those three things, ISO, your f-stop/aperture, and your shutter speed, it's going to come to you so quickly, so easily, you're going to be amazed, and the control you'll have will literally blow you away. And you're going to get better images, more creative images, and you're going to love it. So, thank you for joining me today. I'm Mike Schlueter. I hope that these tips help you with your camera settings and your photography, and I hope that you get out soon and put some of these into practice. Look forward to seeing you next time.